Now, here on The Money, we have discussions with people who really know their stuff, and a wealth of expertise joins me now to discuss the furlough scheme. We've got Michael Kill, CEO of the nighttime industry sector. We've also got with us Matthew Lynn, who's a columnist on the Daily Telegraph. We've got Jonathan Davis, who's an economist and a wealth manager. And from the Northeast, we've got Nikki Jolly, a friend of the show. She's Managing Director of HR2Day. Let's go to you first, Michael. You're in a sector that has used furloughing to some degree. What's happened now within your sector as furlough ends? Will quite a lot of the people furloughed, unfortunately, lose their jobs?
Well, just to start with, I mean, furlough has been the saving grace of the pandemic, particularly for our industry. So I don't want to understate the impact it's had for us in saving jobs. I mean, it's been quite an interesting one. I mean, one of our challenges, particularly around our sector, has been around the uncertainty of whether we're going to be open or closed. So one of the biggest challenges that we've had with furlough, alongside the businesses at the sharpest end of the pandemic who have not been able to trade but have had to incrementally put more contributions in come July, August and September, many have had to make the decision to either make staff redundant or let staff go in survival mode. But one of the biggest challenges we've got at the moment is confidence, and the uncertainty that the government has placed on our industry is causing a huge amount of concern for people returning to the sector after displacing and going and working elsewhere during the 18 months of closure. So without a doubt, furlough has saved us over the initial period. But as this elongated and people reskilled and went elsewhere, we're now finding it very tough to get them to return. And Brexit has a big part to play in that as well. So, without a doubt, furlough has been a real saving grace. But we are challenged with a different dynamic now in terms of return and bouncing back stronger.
Let's turn now to Nikki Jolly, who's in Darlington. Good to talk to you again, Nikki. Now, for viewers who aren't on The Money regulars, Nikki Jolly runs HR2Day. She really has her finger on the pulse of particularly the market for skilled labour in her part of the country. Tell me about the vacancies, Nikki, and the extent to which you think the end of furlough will help you fill vacancies that you're still seeing in your region.
I honestly think it's going to fill a huge gap for us. I think personally, I don't believe furlough should have been extended as a carte blanche for everybody. I think it should have been industry specific, because I think there's a lot of industries and sectors that have continued to use furlough because they haven't dealt with the issue of employment. And I do see that more and more will be made unemployed as a result of this now coming to an end. And I think what it's done is delayed us getting the help and the staffing levels, the skill shortage that we need in the Northeast. Everywhere I turn, people are literally begging to recruit people. I myself personally have been trying to recruit for the last 6 months, and there's just not the people out there. And I think that's a combination of things. I think people, it's been mentioned, are nervous, so they're not necessarily looking to move. And I think the furlough will release a lot of that, because there was a lot of security behind furlough. So I think people will now have either security or not, so they will make those decisions of whether they're going to stay where they are or they're going to look for new challenges, new opportunities. But I do think the unemployment issue is a problem everywhere, but particularly the Northeast, particularly manufacturing, skilled labour. It's just across the board that we need more and more people. And I think personally, furlough for our area has delayed the solution to that problem.
That's really interesting, Nikki, because we've talked a lot in the past. I know how fiercely proud you are of the Northeast, how much you care about the Northeast. And it's interesting as a labour market professional, if you like, who really understands what's happening in your local economy. You think furlough has gone on for too long. I think somebody else who may have that view is my fellow Telegraph columnist. And here he is, Matthew Lynn, on The Money. Matthew, you've written something in The Spectator today where you argue that £70 billion bill for furlough may not represent value for money. Why do you say that?
Yeah, well, I mean, just start. I don't think anything that cost £70 billion could ever be really described as value for money, unless you were buying Apple or something like that. It was an extraordinarily large sum of money, and you touched on this in your introduction. One of the things you have to introduce in this conversation is to say, well, what else could we have done with that money? And the kind of things you start coming up with, absolutely extraordinary. As you mentioned, we could have tripled the police budget, we could have doubled the education budget. We could have made university free for 4 years and got rid of tuition fees. There were lots and lots and lots of things we could have done with that money. So I mean, I think that's the first point: is you kind of have to look at what did we forego, what else we could have done with it. Secondly, I'd agree with some of the other contributors. I think it was fine at the beginning. I think it was introduced when we thought back in March last year this was a 3 to 4 week emergency. And then we'd pretty much get back to normal. And then there was a good case for furlough there, just to help companies through that difficult period, to stop a spike in unemployment. But I think as it dragged on, and I mean, it's extraordinary. If you said then that we'd still be paying 1 million people on furlough in September 21, I think people would have thought that was incredible. And I think it did two things. It distorted the labour market. What we saw during the pandemic was that the economy adjusted, the economy changed, because a free market economy is pretty good at changing, and it's good at coping with shocks, and businesses are good at that. But the furlough it prevented those changes happening, and that ended up jamming up the market. And that comes on to the second point, which is what we're seeing at the moment is this extraordinary situation where companies are being paid by the government to keep people sitting around at home. At the same time, a different set of employers, and possibly even sometimes the same employers, are crying out, thinking, where the heck can we find people? And those million people who are still on furlough, and if you go back 2 or 3 months, it was many more people, could have been looking around and finding a new job. And I think actually they could have found a better paid job if they'd done so. And that would surely have been better. It would have been cheaper, and the labour market would have adjusted more quickly. And I think if we'd ended it sooner or tapered it sooner, then we would have ended up in a stronger position today.
Let's move on to Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth manager. Jonathan, Michael Kill said at the beginning of our conversation how important furlough has been. Rishi Sunak says how important furlough has been in keeping some vulnerable workers, the wolf from the door, at a very, very difficult time. Surely it is understandable that we've paid workers, the state has subsidised workers and the employers in this way.
That's on the assumption that you believe lockdown should have happened in the first place. And I and many others don't believe that it should have happened in the first place. The fact that it did happen, it's a funny thing, but when you pay people to do nothing, what are they going to do? They're going to do nothing. They're going to sit watching GB News all day. Well, you guys might appreciate that, but it's not fantastic for the economy or indeed for people's economic development. We have the example of many states in the United States where they ended federal support many months ago. And what did we see this year? We've seen massive rises in employment. And in the states where they still have the federal support, guess what? They haven't had the big rise in employment. And indeed, Matthew inferred similarly. So it's finally a good thing that we're getting rid of it. I actually believe that they'll bring it back in the form of a thing called universal basic income, but that's perhaps another story. I think it's dreadful value for money, which is your original question, because it has affected a whole swathe, as you say, a third of the working population over the last 18 months in total. And this is going to affect people and their livelihoods and their futures by stopping them for even months or a couple of years from moving on with their lives. So it's about time we got rid of it. And I think we will not have a problem with particularly rising unemployment, maybe in some sectors, but that's because of government policies, not because of the economy globally. Because, as I say, when you stop paying people, then they have to find a job. It's that simple. And similarly, employers, if they need people, they'll just pay them.
Let's go back to Michael Kill. Michael, tell us about furlough at the sharp end, how important it's been for people who work in the industries that you represent. And also, do you agree that furlough should end now, or do you think it should carry on?
No, I do agree, and I'll explain some of the shortcomings which I think quite rightly have possibly not been considered. I mean, we represent a lot of nightclubs, businesses that have been closed for sort of 19 months plus. And as you can appreciate, some of the pubs, bars and restaurants have been able to open. As a nightclub, you're having to contribute July, August, September, 10%, 20%, no trade at all is a lot to contribute. In fact, you've got all of your staff furloughed. So many of these businesses had to contract, had to go into survival mode. So they had to either make their staff redundant or restructure. So furlough sort of work from that perspective. And the other perspective, which kind of reinforces the elongated period that furlough has been in place, is the fact that many of the workforce actually found secondary jobs and utilise the furlough payment alongside the secondary job to enhance their position. And that obviously created many issues. But when we went back to ask them to return off furlough, and they were in a position, a secure role in an industry that wasn't as deeply affected by policy, then they decided to stay with it. So this is where the confidence with the workforce has been very difficult, and the uncertainty around our sector has got us to a position where the policy and the government position has driven us to a point that we are struggling to get staff on board. So I completely hear from the contributors on this, and you can see at the top end where the challenges are. And without a doubt, I'd just reinforce the early stage of this. I think it was the right move. The length of period that's gone on, the impact that we've had long term now as we start to rebuild, it's causing some issues, and is counterproductive.
Thank you for that, Michael. So, apologies to viewers, we've got a little bit of an issue with Michael's communications there. Matthew, let me go to you finally. I know you're a very close observer of macroeconomic data. What do you think is going to happen to unemployment now? If we look at the claimant, the headline rate of unemployment is about 4.5%, 5%. If you look at the claimant count of unemployment, people claiming unemployment-related benefits, it's more like 6 or 7%. Do you think we could see a spike in unemployment now?
Well, I mean, it's a little unpredictable. I mean, we've never quite seen anything where, 1 million people have been paid to, as Jonathan was saying, sit around doing nothing for a year. So we're in pretty novel territory in knowing what the impact of that will be. I mean, on the surface, no. I mean, as you said in your intro, there's 1 million vacancies out there. I think it's more than that, really. I mean, a lot of I think there's more demand for labour than people are putting up vacancies. I think there's lots and lots of companies that would be taking on people and retraining people and getting them out there, filling all the kind of slots that they need if they thought that they might be able to get them. So we shouldn't be seeing big rises in unemployment as people come off furlough. And in fact, I think the problem we've had is the reverse, that we've created a problem for the economy by taking too much labour out of the market. And obviously we've managed to get through a whole discussion about mentioning Brexit. We should get a little prize, but that's also taken some people out of the labour market, and then furlough took more people out of the labour market. And actually, in the background, we've seen other things like a decline in participation rate amongst older workers, amongst some women, which has taken people out of the labour market. So actually, we've had a big problem in the economy in the withdrawing labour from the market, which is usually not a good thing. And we're now going to put some of that back in, but we're just going to do a little bit of redressing the balance. I think actually most of those people will get new jobs, and I think they'll get higher paid jobs, slightly more skilled jobs, and higher paid jobs as well, which will be good overall.
We are running out of time. Nikki, let me just ask you briefly, do you fear for rising unemployment in the Northeast, Tyneside, Teesside, elsewhere in your region as furlough now ends?
I think a lot of companies in the Northeast have already done the restructure the first time furlough is going to come to an end, if I'm honest. I think there'll be a slight rise, but I think, like you say, there'll be a balance, and I think they'll go out and get bigger, better jobs, if I'm honest about it. I think give us till the new year for these things to balance out, personally.